like half the year where you've actually maintained your health goals. So this is an interesting statistic because weight is definitely something that people struggle with. So according to Nutrition Australia, on average Australians gain between 0.8 kilos and 1.5 kilos over the Christmas period, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it's pretty rare for people to actually lose that weight after Christmas. So I just thought I'd put that in there, not to scare anyone, but that's sort of the power of what happens over the Christmas season when we indulge in rich food more than usual. So a little bit about me. I'm a dietitian and I'm doing my PhD at the moment, looking at cardiovascular disease and nutrition. I used to have a bit of a fear of food and a lack of nutrition knowledge to understanding all the amazing things that food can do for our body. So my specialty is helping people understand the impact of what we eat on our health and how to actually go about this. And what I do is I help people achieve and maintain a healthy weight. I treat and sometimes reverse chronic diseases with diet, so type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and help people reduce their food cravings so that they can enjoy all these healthy foods as well. So before we get started with the whole theme of how to navigate Christmas, I'd love to know what some of your health goals are and what you're perhaps most concerned about over the Christmas break, if anyone is keen to share some of their health goals or fears.
I just want to remain healthy until I die. I don't want any of the illness in between.
Yeah, just that constant. Yeah, great. Would anyone else like to share their health goals over Christmas? Or what they're trying to...
Probably kickstart my husband and myself to kickstart a better routine.
Great.
So a bit of a oomph, kind of probably concentrated period, so because I don't usually maintain everything at the same time, I know I get excited, and then every 2 years and I'm really good, and then it kind of peaks out. So that's kind of my pattern, so I'm going to get excited again.
Great, so you need that constant sort of reminder and motivation.
In our house, of course, it's moving more, the exercise part, but it's looking at what we can change or replace or something. Something has to shift with food because we're still eating like we were 20 years ago, too much, and we're not using the energy.
Yeah, right. Have you been to some of these talks before? Or this is the first one? Oh, great. Okay, so you might find out some new information as well. Great. Anyone else keen to share? Yeah.
So I've actually been on quite a good journey in the last sort of 6 months, and I don't want to blow it and start, just going, oh, just have this, it's Christmas, just have that.
Yeah.
I'm the only one in my family and extended family, so I'm a widow with that.
Makes it a bit trickier. Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. So a little bit of an overview. I'm just going to briefly mention sort of what the optimal human diet is and the sort of foods that we want to be eating, which I know that a lot of you will already be quite familiar with this. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're drawn to certain unhealthy foods. And then I'm going to go into my 10 tips or strategies for staying healthy over the festive season. And then I've got some recipes as well, which I'll show you. So I've got some breakfast, what have I got? Entrees, mains and dessert recipes. And then I've got a QR code at the end as well, which you can scan and get the list of those recipes as well, and some websites which have a lot of recipes too. So what is the optimal diet for humans? So we want a diet that is health promoting, so something that's nutrient rich, get the most amount of nutrients, high fibre, lots of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants and nutrients, phytonutrients. And phytonutrients are those nutrients that we get from plant foods. So what we're really looking at is a whole food plant-based diet. So the aim is consuming health promoting foods, and this is all from Jenny's website, Whole Food Plant-Based Health Australia. So a high carbohydrate diet, whole foods from whole foods making up the majority of calories, large servings of vegetables, particularly those dark green leafy vegetables because they're super nutrient dense, fresh fruit not limited, so having as much of that as you want. Combination of both cooked and raw foods, because when we cook foods we destroy some nutrients, but some nutrients also become more bioavailable, so available for our body to use. So a combination of those small amounts of nuts and seeds, which is why they make up a sort of a slither in the plate, because they are particularly energy dense, although they are also nutrient dense. Added sugars and salt, keeping that to a minimum, which I'm sure you all know. Not adding oils, including olive oils. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs and dairy are excluded, and processed foods, because they're super low in fibre and all of those nutrients have been depleted, really keeping those to a minimum or avoiding them, and no calorie restriction. So basically whole food plant-based, or as plant-based as possible, essentially. The closer you get to that, the healthier we tend to be. So why this sort of way of eating? So this is information from Doctors for Nutrition website. They've worded it really well, so I thought I'm going to go with that. So well-implemented whole food plant-based diet has been shown to prevent and even reverse a lot of chronic diseases. So a few of you have been to quite a few of the talks that we've been providing the last year or so. And that's because these foods are nutrient dense, rich in fibre, which we know so many of us just struggle to get enough of, vitamins, minerals and phytonutrients. And these nutrients have the ability to do all of these amazing things. So reduce inflammation and oxidative stress in our body, create a healthier gut microbiome and gut function, reduce cholesterol and improve circulation, so thinking about heart disease, regulate estrogen and other hormones. If any of you came to Jenny and I's talk on women's health, we talked a lot about that. Enhancing and balancing the immune system and regulating gene expressions, thinking particularly about cancer with the gene expression. And a lot of people sort of think, oh, that just sounds like quite extreme to be able to follow, but people are able to follow this diet because of a lot of the health improvements that they receive from eating this sort of way. So improved mood and energy, better skin tone and resolution of acne, which I certainly experienced a lot myself, improved sports performance, improved gut health and improved reproductive health as well. So why are we drawn to these foods? People often think that there's something wrong with them, that they lack willpower. So if you're hungry, which food are you going to go for, the apple or the muffin? Which foods do people tend to go for? It's usually the muffin, because our brain just knows that it's got more calories, it's going to be easier to eat. I mean, to eat the same amount of calories from apples, you're probably going to need to sit there and eat, probably 3 or 4 apples, which most people just wouldn't get through that many apples. Has anyone heard of the book, The Pleasure Trap? I'm sure some of you would have. Yeah, this is a really great book. Highly recommend it. So basically, animals and all humans and animals are all designed with these 3 principles of motivation. So we've got seeking pleasure, which we get from food, energy conservation, which we get from, eating foods that are easy to eat, but also not moving too much, not having to go out of our way too much to get food. That's why McDonald's is so successful, because you just drive through and get your really calorie-rich meal and avoiding pain. And these increase our odds of survival. Because humans have spent most of their existence not getting enough food. Like I mentioned, for most of human history, lack of food was the major problem. And to survive, we evolved to seek pleasure from really rich foods. So in nature, these are foods that we find that have the most amount of calories. So things like honey. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen footage of the Hadza tribe in Tanzania and the lengths they go to get honey. Basically, so honey will be like in a beehive really high up a tree. They get these pegs and they essentially put them in the tree, and they have to climb up the tree like 10, 20 metres with a branch that's got smoke on it, so that once they get to the top they can sort of waft away the bees, but they're getting stung by bees at the same time, and they're able to put their hand in and get the honey and climb back down. And Hadza people die from doing this. But this is the lengths that we go to get this rich food, so it's really ingrained in us to want this sort of food. And then meat, obviously meat is a lot more difficult to get in the wild compared to foraging for food that's on the ground or in our area. And then nuts as well. So obviously now we get nuts that are ground up and put in a paste into a jar, so it's a lot easier to eat these sorts of things. But in the wild, cracking open a nut with a rock is a lot more difficult. So that's why we like sweet and fatty foods. And food companies profit from understanding this. So I've just attempted to sort of put together something just to demonstrate sort of what, how food processing works. Basically, if we get foods that we find in nature, so sugarcane, olives, things like that, process those into sugar, so removing all of the fibre, all of the phytonutrients, all of the good stuff from the sugarcane and the olives. We end up with sugar and olives, and then sugar and oil, and then adding salt as well. Really refining wheat and potatoes to end up with a flour, removing the fibre from that, which removes a whole lot of the nutrients, ending up with like a nice fluffy white powder, doing the same sort of thing with potatoes. And then we get these sorts of things like donuts and chips. And food companies know that these foods are hyperpalatable because of that salt, oil, sugar combination. It's like you don't find the three of them in nature. Like I showed you, you sort of find either the sweet or the fatty, but not really in combination. And these foods are calorie rich and processed, which is, or CRAP for short. A dietitian in the States, Jeff Novick, came up with this, and I think it's really clever. And they're hyperpalatable as well. So this is also from the book The Pleasure Trap, and I think this is really a really key thing to understand. So when we're eating whole natural plant foods, I'm actually just going to point in this zone, we get a normal amount of pleasure from that. If you're used to eating that, you enjoy that. So kids who grow up to eat a lot of vegetables tend to like vegetables. Kids who don't grow up eating a lot of vegetables don't eat them. When we add in something that's hyperpalatable, we get this enhanced pleasure zone. So it just tastes so good, like our brain isn't used to that, it's amazing. And over time, if you're used to eating these sorts of foods, these become normal for us. So to get a normal amount of pleasure from our food, we need to be eating that sort of food. And when we try something that's whole natural plant foods, we get this suboptimal amount of pleasure. It tastes bland, pretty much. But the good news is the more of these foods that you eat and the less of these foods you eat, the more normal or the more pleasure you get from eating these whole natural plant foods. So also what I'm trying to say is that someone who's used to eating whole natural plant foods compared to gets the same amount of pleasure from their food as someone who's used to eating this hyperpalatable food. But when you're keeping those hyperpalatable junk food essentially, you struggle to get to this stage with the whole natural plant foods. And this is also something that I find really interesting, the extinction graph. So basically also from the Pleasure Trap book. So I'm going to talk about my experience with cheese. So, I mean, I haven't eaten cheese for probably over 7 years now, but I found that really difficult to give up. So I used to always, crave cheese a little bit because it's just something that I always grew up with. And when I gave up cheese, the cravings got worse and worse. It was like my body was like, no, we have to have cheese, like make the cravings really, really bad. And it got to this point, and eventually the cravings started going away, and they decline and they get to this extinction where you just stop wanting it. But then later down the track, occasionally you get this little sort of spontaneous recovery, and that's the whole evolutionary mechanism. So maybe like 3 months down the track or a year down the track. And I remember it's probably about a year and a half after not having any cheese, I was in Canada and I was walking through a farmer's market, and I don't know if they pasteurise their milk there or anything, but I got this smell like from this cheese store, and it smelled so good, and I was like, oh my God, I reckon that was like a little spontaneous recovery. But I was like, nope. And now I have no desire to eat it or anything. It's been a long time. And a great little quote from Doug Lyle, who's one of the co-authors on The Pleasure Trap. Once you're free of addicting foods, you will begin to appreciate the subtle pleasure that fruits, vegetables, beans and intact whole grains provide. And I think that's very true. So now I'll go into my tips and tricks or strategies to help you survive the extreme temptations over the Christmas period or the festive season. So preparation is really the key to success. I think that if we don't prepare, it's just not going to happen. You're just going to end up overindulging. So we have to prepare, which can seem a bit annoying, but if this is something that's really important to you, like, you just do it essentially. So before you're going to a party, I've got a couple of tips for this. Always offer to bring a dish or two to share, especially dessert. So speak to your host before going. You can just call them up, let them know that you've been on a roll with your Plant Strong eating program or whatever it is that your health goals are, and you don't want to put them out. So it's easier to just say, I'm going to bring a dish, compared to asking someone to prepare something completely different for you. And bring along a dish. Also, it gives others the opportunity to see how, you know, tasty and pretty your food is. So I feel like I definitely put in more effort when I know that people are very much like, oh, your weird food. I always make sure to bring something that's like, that looks really good and that also tastes really good. And it gives others the option as well for tasty, healthy food. And even if there isn't really anything that you can eat there, at least you know that you've got your dish there that you can eat. So as long as you at least fill up most of your plate with that, then that's going to work really well. Eating before you go is an insurance policy. Now, this can seem a little bit strange, but it's completely fine if it's a casual dining experience. So actually the other day I was just on the Sunshine Coast this week for a course on using ultrasound for cardiovascular health. And basically on Thursday night there was this big networking dinner. I was like, well, I'm going to go because I want to network, but I knew that, you know, this 3-course meal was not going to be sort of stuff that I really wanted to eat. And although I gave them my dietary requirements, and basically how I phrased it was vegan, no oil, little salt, whole grains, I knew that this was one of those things where they would just combine all of the different dietary requirements into one, and then I would end up with a pile of, you know, like broccoli and cabbage on my plate, which is pretty much what I got. So I'm glad that I ate something beforehand. I just had half a sweet potato with some stuff on it, so I wasn't going to be hungry. And of course for dessert it was like this really energy dense sort of food that I didn't really want to eat, with a bit of fruit on the side, so I ate the fruit. So if you filled up on those like the whole grains and the starches before you go, it's like the legumes, potatoes and whole grains, things that fill us up. It won't really matter if there's a small selection of food because you won't be super hungry, and you can focus on what you're really there for, which is the social gathering. So when you're at a Christmas party, what can you do? Select the most fibre-rich foods. So why do I say fibre? Again, thank you to Jenny for putting this on her website. So the lowest calorie dense foods contain fibre, water and those micronutrients. And fibre, why I keep talking about fibre is because it adds bulk to our food, or fibre and fluid, and fills us up without really adding too many calories. So if we have a look here, this is the, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, but for those of you who haven't seen this, this is looking at the amount of calories in a certain amount of food. So we're looking at per 100 grams. So the foods on the left in the green, vegetables, fruits, potatoes, legumes, rice and pasta, are quite low in calories, whereas because they're high in fibre and they're high in water. The foods on the right, meat, avocado, bread, cheese, sugar, nuts, seeds and oil, very high in calories. So if we're eating a lot of our foods from this section, we're going to be getting a whole lot more calories. Whereas you're eating foods from this section, you can eat quite a lot before you'd be getting too many calories. Now, our body is, our stretch receptors in our stomach are better regulated. How do I explain this? When you're eating foods that are higher in fibre, you get full quicker before eating too many calories. So just a few sort of tips on sort of what foods we'd be looking at eating that are high in fibre. For breakfast, things like oats and beans, like baked beans, are high in fibre. For lunch and dinners, looking at those whole grains and starches. It's like the brown rice, the quinoa, wholemeal pasta and couscous, potatoes, legumes like your beans, chickpeas and lentils, and vegetables as well. And then for dessert, of course, we've got fruit. We can make a whole lot of other things for dessert as well, but I just put fruit in there because it's easy. So tip number 4, start with the healthiest foods first, or at least the least energy dense foods first. So if you're going to a Christmas party and these are the sorts of foods that you see, if it's like a buffet sort of thing, which it often is, what sorts of foods, what foods would you add to your plate first? So I mean, I've actually put them in order just to make it easier. So putting more of the salad foods on, because the first food that we put on our plate tends to be the food that we put the most amount on. So if any of you have been to the potlucks, you'll notice that everyone goes from the left to the right, and the food on the left always runs out first, and the food on the right, there's usually more of it because we pile on more of the first foods. So starting with those salad or sort of low calorie foods first, and then moving on to the more roast vegetables, and then the legume sorts of foods, and then whole grain starchy foods like potatoes and brown rice and things like that. And then I suppose, my tip is, my strategy is actually leaving these foods off your plate. But at least even if you are starting to or adding some of those things in, at least filling up your plate with these foods first, so that you know that you'll get more nutrients and most of your calories from these sorts of foods. So what foods would you start eating on your plate first? Basically, so if you've got a plate filled with this sort of stuff, you've got wholemeal pasta, legume sort of stew things, like salads, like kale salad, carrot and beetroot salad, and then you've got your cooked vegetables. Starting with the foods that are lowest in calorie first. So filling up your stomach with those first, and then moving around your plate, unless things are all mixed in together, which obviously then you just sort of eat it like that. Because most of us go straight for the more calorie-rich foods first, and then we sort of get full and we leave like half the salad on the plate. So I've just put some little numbers there. So starting with the raw sort of stuff, then the cooked vegetables, legume stews and wholemeal pasta, but of course that's usually mixed in together anyway. Tip number 5, incorporate festive non-alcoholic drinks. Now, I know a lot of people hate it when I say this. We know that alcohol is damaging to our health. The recommended maximum intake in Australia is no more than 10 standard drinks per week and no more than 4 in one day. However, the less you have, the healthier you are. I think we all know that. So the recommended intake really is 0. We know that alcohol is dehydrating. It's very calorie dense, and it increases our appetite, which is why you see all these young 20-year-olds on a Friday or Saturday night at McDonald's, because they've had so much alcohol and they're hungry and they're craving those really calorie dense foods. And as I said, it also increases our desire to eat those calorie rich and processed foods. So these are some drinks that I would recommend. Obviously water is going to be the best option, but if you want something that's a bit more festive, that's not really going to be damaging to our health, fruit infused water, and then you can eat the fruit afterwards, sparkling water, and something like Dash water. I mean, there are other brands that do sort of this thing, but it's just sparkling water with fruit infused, but no sugar, no fake sugars or anything like that, or artificial sweeteners. And then I just thought I'd add this, because then people go, oh, what about non-alcoholic drinks? I don't know how to say that exactly, but so I've just got like a little ladder. It's like the higher up the ladder you go, the healthier the drink is going to be. So you've got your alcoholic drinks there, but if you really struggle to sort of give those up, this is going to be better, the non-alcoholic wines and beers and things like that. But then this is going to be even better, and then obviously water is the optimal. So the higher up you go, the healthier the drink's going to be. Home tips. Okay, this is my favourite one. Keep junk food out of the house. It's a really good tip. So it's probably the most important tool. And this is a really nice quote from the Pleasure Trap book. It's out of respect for the power of the pleasure-seeking and energy conservation mechanisms that reside inside each one of us. If we keep enticing ourselves with those calorie-dense foods, like the high-fat, high-sugar, drug-like foods, like they mentioned in the book, where are they going to end up? They're going to end up inside of us. I certainly know if there's something that's really high in calories, if there's peanut butter in my house, I know it's going to end up inside me, and I'm probably going to eat the whole jar in a week, so it just doesn't really enter the house. So you want to make it necessary to go out for such items, which usually means that we don't go out as much for those items because it requires us to get out of the house and travel. If it's in the house, it's a lot easier. And even if people are able to control themselves with junk food in the house, we know that its presence is mentally exhausting. So I work with a lot of women who have children and a partner in the house, and they're trying to be really healthy, but the rest of the family is not. And they are probably find it the most difficult just to stay away from these foods because they know that the husband and the children want these foods in the house. And if they're in the house, they know that, well, it's mentally exhausting to try and stay away from them. So if you can implement this rule, I think this is probably the best thing you can do. Tip number 7, if you want something sweet, make it yourself. So, I mean, we know that if we're at the supermarket, we want something sweet. Like, there's probably not much at the supermarket apart from fruit that's actually going to be health promoting or just not terrible for us. So it's to prevent us from purchasing junk food in the supermarket. Also, I think we all know this, but when we go to the supermarket, make sure you're not really hungry, because we know that a lot of the more calorie-dense foods and more food ends up in the trolley. But don't go when you're too full either, because then you sort of think, I'm not going to be hungry this week, and then you don't bring enough food home. And most people report this as quite achievable as well, because it's sort of like, it's not saying no to yourself, it's just saying, if I want this, then I'll make it myself. And there are lots of recipes online for something that's a little bit more sort of, festive or a little bit richer, but that's not going to be totally damaging to our health. And you have control over the ingredients inside that end up inside those sweets as well. Start the day with a really healthy breakfast. This is a really nice one. So I work with a lot of kids in youth justice, so kids that are incarcerated, and the first thing that I tell to them, that I get them to change if they're trying to achieve a healthier weight, is just to start the day with a really healthy fibre-rich breakfast. They have access to a lot of oats, and I always just say, just have a really big bowl of oats. Even if you're not hungry, just start with a small bowl of oats at least. And I always get this feedback from them that when that they end up eating, they have less cravings for junk food, because unfortunately they do have access to junk food all around them all the time. They end up craving less junk food, and they end up sort of being fuller throughout the day. So I think this is a really nice one. It's also the easiest meal to start healthy habits with, because most of us tend to eat the same thing for breakfast. It gives us a bit of a boost of energy as well, and a little bit of healthy weight advice. I know that a lot of people, get this from a lot of people, they skip breakfast either because they've always done that or because they're doing this intermittent fasting sort of thing. If you're doing intermittent fasting, skipping breakfast is usually not the way to go. You'd want to be having a large breakfast, medium-sized lunch and small dinner. That's going to be the best sort of thing. Get your energy at the start of the day rather than the end of the day. So a few breakfast ideas. If you're not someone who's overly hungry for breakfast, fruit is a really good start. And then we've got oats. You can make sweet oats. If you're more of a savoury person, you can make savoury oats. I mean, there are a whole lot of other whole grains there, but I'm just sort of giving some typical sort of breakfast things that people tend to like to eat, or baked beans or something like that. A homemade one, the store-bought ones, I think we all know haven't got the best ingredients in there. Number 9, this is a really big one, get support. So adopting this sort of way of eating, if you don't have the support from family and friends, is really a struggle.